Good evening. Egypt's foreign minister is in Beirut, pushing for humanitarian aid and a ceasefire as Israeli airstrikes intensify and Hezbollah strikes back, raising regional tensions to a critical level. In Europe, Ukraine ramps up drone attacks towards Moscow, with NATO pledging more support and Trump calling for calm as the conflict's direction hangs on shifting alliances. And at COP29 in Azerbaijan, countries debate climate finance and emissions reductions, yet progress faces obstacles, with calls for action and support to address global energy challenges. These are our topics tonight. Welcome to In Focus.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Well, let's start with the Middle East, and the Washington Post reports that the US has decided to not withhold military aid to Israel, despite earlier warnings regarding the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The Biden administration set a 30-day deadline for Israel to improve aid access. But the US has since acknowledged the warning's limited progress, despite some improvements attributed to American pressure. Additional measures are still deemed necessary to address the ongoing crisis. Meanwhile, Israel's military strikes continue, including an attack on Beirut's southern suburbs, where it targeted Hezbollah missile sites. This escalation highlights the growing instability in the region, exacerbating tensions between Israel and Lebanon. The war has claimed thousands of lives, with over 43,500 deaths reported in Gaza and more than 3,000 in Lebanon. Despite efforts to negotiate peace, the situation remains dire, with both regional and international actors scrambling for solutions. Now, providing some analysis for us regarding the current situation in the Middle East, joining us from Cairo is Dr. Osama El Said, the editor-in-chief of Al Akhbar newspaper. Thank you very much and welcome to the program. Now, Egypt's foreign minister is in Beirut. How important is Egypt's role in the region?
In fact, Egypt has a lot of roles to play when it comes to fostering and supporting the sovereignty of the Lebanese state as it confronts the Israeli aggression. In fact, Lebanon is a very important and pivotal country in the Middle East. There are a lot of strong relations between Egypt and Lebanon, and this visit from the end of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt to Beirut, this is in fact a culmination of these relations. There is in fact an aerial bridge that has been sustained between Cairo and Beirut ever since the blast of the Beirut port. Egypt has been providing as well a lot of aid to the Lebanese state, and the Egyptian stances always underline the importance of the Lebanese stability and the importance of not interfering in the Lebanese internal affairs. And I think that this message, in fact, conveys a lot of pivotal messages from Egypt. And of course, Egypt has a fixed relation with Lebanon, and this is embodied by this very important and significant visit.
And do you think there are any signs that international diplomacy is moving in the right direction?
I think that international diplomacy is caught in a predicament right now, specifically that relates to the confronting of the Israeli escalations in Gaza or in Lebanon. First of all, there isn't an adequate international will, political will, to pressurize Netanyahu to stop the war. And with regards to the American presence, this has been receding significantly, and we know that the Biden administration has been preoccupied with the presidential elections, and this has, I would say, set the region on fire. And in fact, there isn't a lot of efficacy relative to international organizations, but these challenges are very important to overcome. We have to find different solutions other than military solutions in order to overcome these conflicts and challenges. There has to be a lot of political will and political instruments and solutions operationalized by international organizations in order to bring forth innovative political solutions that can eradicate this conflict. But until now, this political will is nearly non-existent, or I would say limited. And so there is a pressing need for more pressure to be imposed on Israel in order for it to succumb to international efforts carried out by Egypt or by the states or any other party of the international community.
And the United States has given mixed signals when it comes to military aid. Of course, there was a deadline for Israel allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza. The deadline passed, but they're still going to send military aid. Do you think there's any situation or any circumstances where the United States might withdraw its military aid to Israel?
Without the existence of actual pressures on the Netanyahu government, I don't at all think that Israel is going to withdraw its forces. In fact, the liquid American stances relative to Israel are the situations that actually pave the way for Netanyahu to keep on perpetuating this war. So I don't think Netanyahu is going to withdraw his forces. And up until now, the state is the biggest supporter for Israel. It has established aerial bridge through which it gets to supply arms to the Israeli occupation forces in order for it to keep on expanding its offensives on the Israeli or on the Palestinian people. And so we can see as well how the states are facilitating the way for Israeli military chiefs to achieve or to get impunity from their military assaults and their genocidal practices on the Palestinian people. In fact, this is something that is abhorrent, in fact, and Israel would have never been able to perpetuate this war over this course of extended time if it wasn't for the continuous armament support coming from the states, and if it wasn't as well for the political support coming from the states to Israel. As well, we can see the American role when it comes to supporting Israel in its attempts to displace Palestinian people as well.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Osama El-Sayed, the editor-in-chief of Al-Akhbar newspaper, joining us from Cairo. Thank you very much for being on the program. Next, we are talking about Ukraine, where escalating drone strikes towards Moscow signal a new phase in the conflict. With NATO pledging support and Trump urging restraint, international alliances are being put to the test. The New York Times has reported that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on President-elect Donald Trump to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression, emphasizing the importance of a strong America for global stability. Zelensky invoked Ronald Reagan's peace through strength policy, hoping to align Trump with a firm stance against Russia. Despite this, Trump has historically shown disdain for Ukraine, often blaming Zelensky for initiating the war and expressing skepticism about continued U.S. military aid. His admiration for Russian President Vladimir Putin and his transactional foreign policy approach raised concerns about future U.S. support for Ukraine. Zelensky's plea suggests Ukraine's strategic importance to the U.S. and is an attempt to appeal to Trump's focus on resources and power, while signaling potential risks if Trump pushes for a rapid peace deal that could disadvantage Ukraine. And to talk about this further, we are joined from New York by Professor B.L. De Silva, who is a political risk analyst even, and strategic expert as well. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Professor. So with Ukraine escalating these drone strikes in Moscow's direction, could this signal a dangerous shift in the conflict's dynamics?
Well, the Trump administration coming in next year will change the whole equation. And I think a lot of the European allies in NATO are scrambling. And I've just heard from the British that there's the Ukrainian delegation there trying to ramp up support from the UK in order to offset any, shortfall in support for their war effort against the Russians, with Trump, cutting that line off for them. So I think it's dire times for the Ukrainians, and Zelensky himself, I think his days are numbered. And we will see a number of changes taking place. Whether the Europeans are able to sustain the Ukrainian defense remains to be seen.
Okay, and you talk about NATO there. How do you assess NATO's recent pledge of additional support? And is it ever going to be enough?
The thing is this, NATO will take, probably 3 years in order to ramp up their defense, given that the Germans are woefully, inadequate in the defense sector, even the French. The Poles are the ones that have the biggest, tank army in the region, but I don't think it's enough for some, if say, for example, there is an incursion in the Baltic states, which is everyone's greatest fear, there wouldn't be time for NATO to really respond. Because if you look at the Iskander missile, that could reach the Baltic states. There's no time for reaction. So given all of that, I think President Putin is on a stronger platform than President Zelensky and the Ukrainians. So that's where the status quo is kind of shifting in favor of Russia.
And Trump has kind of signaled about a potential peace deal with Russia. What might that look like, and what would NATO's opinion on that outcome be, do you think, especially given Trump's lukewarm feelings towards NATO?
So, with a person like President Trump, all what he cares are the optics, how it benefits him, not national interest per se, and would he look good at the end of the story. So he would play for a peace deal that will appease the Russians to the detriment of the Ukrainians, where he would he'll be the peacemaker, but it'll come at a cost, and he doesn't care for the Ukrainians, I mean, we all know that. So that's why I said, the status quo is shifting.
And Russia, I mean, on the ground in Ukraine, Russia's claiming to be pushing forward in the south. How do you assess how the war is currently going?
So they've got 50,000 troops massed, and it'll be a Bakhmut too. Probably they would break out. Whether the Ukrainians are able to sustain a reasonable defense or not remains to be seen. Bakhmut was lost after a lot of loss of blood and treasure. So, and given that North Korean troops have also joined, but the thing with the North Koreans is that they've never been blooded since the 50s in a proper war. So again, whether they perform well or not is another thing. But it's a meat grinder. It's just chewing up bodies and body parts.
And as the US prepares for the Trump administration and the world prepares for it, what do you think they're thinking in Moscow right now with Trump coming in?
I think they're pleased, relieved even. The next thing for Moscow would be to get off the economic hook there with sanctions. So war is just a short-term thing, but the long term would be how to get the Russian economy back on track, because that has suffered horrendously, given the brain drain that has happened with so many people leaving Russia, and also the knock-on effect of sanctions, and also the inability of Russian industry, as it may be, to produce anything worthwhile in their defense. The much wanted, USSR military doesn't exist anymore, and therefore the Russians really want to lean on their friends from East Asia and start a process of rebuilding and stabilizing their economy.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Professor De Silva, a political risk analyst and strategic expert, joining us from New York. Thank you very much. Now, finally, we turn to Baku, where COP29 has brought world leaders together to tackle pressing climate challenges. As discussions focus on finance and emissions, the path to meaningful climate action remains steep.
It gives me great pleasure to declare open the 29th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
COP29 must tear down the walls of climate finance.
Now, DW reports today that global carbon emissions are expected to hit a record high in 2024, casting a long shadow over the ongoing COP29 discussions in Baku. This latest assessment from the Global Carbon Project underscores the urgency of meaningful action. Despite a decade of efforts, fossil fuel emissions continue to rise, pushing us closer to the dangerous 1.5 degree Celsius threshold. As scientists highlight the devastating impact of extreme weather events this year, COP29 must focus on turning these warnings into immediate action to safeguard our future. And we are joined now by Dr. Alet Sahan, who is a professor of environmental economics and is going to be helping us break down our COP29 issues. Dr. Sahan, how crucial is the 1.3 trillion climate finance target demanded by developing nations at COP29?
I think this is essentially bringing some reality to the ground because for the last several years they were talking about in the region of $100 billion, but I think because of the latest scientific evidence has shown that the cost of climate-related damages and the not just damages or expected damage, but rather to be able to encourage and incentivize developing countries to take some preventive actions to build resiliency into their own national development plans and to be able to adapt to the dire impacts of climate change. I think now it's very clear that the developing world is going to need trillions of dollars. So this is just the beginning. When we're talking about this 1.3 trillion, I think this is as much as the current scientific evidence has revealed. But as we move forward, we are still going to encounter more and more damages or needs for climate finance. So climate finance is a kind of an evolving need, and as there's more scientific evidence that is brought forward, I think this figure is going to grow much higher. This is, to my mind, actually.
Well, of course, there are very many differences between different countries' approaches to their climate challenges. The UK has set ambitious emissions targets, for example. India's emissions, though, are set to rise. What does this situation tell us about the global climate efforts?
Okay, so first of all, we need to reach a high, and then until we like reaching plateauing, and then we would need to start to reverse the situation, the carbon emissions situation. So countries would have to reach an all-time high until they start to bring them down. So the question is, when is this going to come? When is this all-time high is going to come so that we start to reverse the situation? So it's been this debate has been going on forever. We've been doing lots of simulations, lots of all kinds of modeling so that we would know, okay, that's it, 2025 is going to be the all-time high. Then we start to go down back to 1990 levels by 50%, 60%. There are so many targets, there are so many figures around, but the idea is how do you, in the end, how are we going to be able to meet this challenge? It's an existential challenge that the whole planet, the whole international community is trying here in Baku. They're all trying to come together so as to try to save this planet. So I think we're running out of time, we're running out of steam. So many things are happening in the terms of the global political landscape that may not be very much conducive to the effort that is happening right now. So maybe it's a setback. We don't know. We still early days to come. But climate finance is a crucial player in how we're going to bring this planet back to hopefully 1.5 degrees. So time will only show.
And what do you think Trump's re-election means for climate issues? We know he's not a big fan of the Paris Agreement. What's the difference you think it's going to make once he gets into the White House in January?
I don't think there's going to be any difference rather from his very first term in office in 2016. I think the United States pulled out the Paris Agreement. This time they're going as far as, we started to hear some rumors about even multilateral development banks. The United States may revisit the whole idea of their own membership and contributions. And the Bretton Woods agreements, I think, whatever is happening here in Baku, I think the repercussions of having the Republicans and President-elect Trump back in the White House, I think this is going to be, it's devastating. I would imagine it's going to be devastating for any kind of climate change efforts that are being done. So unless the European Union would step up their efforts and try to fill in the gap.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to have to finish it there. It's not the most positive note to end it on, but thank you very much, Dr. Sahan, for joining us on the program and for shedding light on these critical aspects of COP29. And as the summit progresses, the world watches closely, hopeful that this gathering will translate words into action with a tangible impact on climate resilience and sustainability. Thank you very much. That is the end of our In Focus today. Thanks for watching.